But part of what I'm excited about is sharing this topic is that I actually yesterday took screenshots of my inbox, and then I thought, no, I can't possibly share that because collectively between my important inbox, which had 3,000 emails, and my general inbox that had, I don't know, at least that amount, I realized, boy, I have an awful lot of emails. So let's get started and find out about you. Let's go to the poll and let's find out how many emails do you have in your inbox. If you can put up the poll, that would be great. So how many emails do you have in your inbox? Let's share that poll and we'll get a sense of how we can see here. All right, here we are. How many emails are in your inbox at the moment? So who wants to answer that? Who is brave enough to share their amount there? All right, in a moment, I will show you the results. And the results are still coming in. I am fascinated that people have less than 20. I am really impressed with that. Okay, so we'll close the poll and we will share the results. So here's the results. The people who have less than 20 emails, you are just amazing to me. You are just amazing to me. The reality is a lot of us do have, I mean, if I did over 1,000, I thought at what point am I going to really ask how many more over 1,000 do we really want to ask that question? So the reality is we are drowning in email, and the best way to talk about this is how we can better send email so we can actually get good results from the emails we send. So here's what we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to break it down bit by bit. The number one reason why people don't respond to your emails, we're going to talk about that. How to write differently from mobile. Most people are looking at their emails on a mobile device. For me, I often look at them at 2 or 3 devices. I will check it on my mobile, and then I might answer it differently on my computer, etc. I'm going to talk about the international audience. I have taught this workshop in several situations to international companies, and we're going to talk about how you need to write differently for that. When to maybe draft your message on paper versus electronic, and also the very last thing you want to do before you hit send. All right, so let's get started. The number one reason people don't respond, you actually don't say enough in the email. There's not a really clear purpose of the email. For example, you'll get an email that has, yep, how are you? I think the how are you is very nice and it's important, but you do want to figure out how you can possibly be sure that it is very clear about what it is you're messaging and what it is that you want to say. Bad formatting. There's way too many paragraphs. There's way too much detail. Think about this in bullets. That you want to have it be clear that people can look and say 1, 2, 3. Here's the bullets of what you really want to accomplish. An old subject line. This one is just so easy to change, but you can easily change the subject line to figure out what should you next talk about versus it's a topic from 3 or 4 conversations ago. So you want to be thoughtful about changing the subject line. Before text messaging, I actually used to use email subject line as my text messaging system. I would put back and forth in the subject line what I wanted to talk about and what I was hoping the other person would do, so they didn't even have to open up the email in many cases. One thing that I think is really important is there contact information? I got an email from someone the other day. I'm really jazzed to talk to you about such and such a project. Let's set up a call. Well, okay, so let's set up a call, but that creates a whole other project for me. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about some different tools that you can use to help move this forward, because you want to be sure you're taking charge of this communication and not finding a way for someone to have an excuse. The last part is email complicates communication. In some cases, it can actually cause some significant problems. Let me go back here. How do I go backwards? here we go, backwards. And in some cases, it can actually do damage. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to think about what is the best way, is email the best way to communicate something? An email is a terrific way for Kirthi and I to connect. Here's the topics I want to talk about. Here's something that I want to add to the polls. You know, here's where I'm going to be traveling. We don't need to do that on the phone, and we certainly do not need to do that in person. However, in many cases, you really do want to be careful, because in some cases, you can have a problem when you send a note to somebody on email, and then it complicates the situation. It makes the other person feel not as thoughtful. And this is why, for those of you who were in my session last week, I apologize. I love this chart. If you look at the red, over here, and then you look at the blue, if you put your hands over both of those elements, and you realize every time you send an email, you are forfeiting 93% of your communication power. So one of the reasons why email is a wonderful tool is it is efficient, it's effective, but it also can be damaging. So is email the best thing to do? Because right now you have my voice. It's a little bit warbly, but you have my voice. So you want to think about, is this the best way to communicate what it is that you want to say? Because in some cases, maybe a phone call is better. In other cases, maybe it's going to be a way for you to find a way to say to somebody, yeah, I do want to have this conversation. But we actually need to either talk in person, use Skype, use some of the other tools that I'll mention a little bit later on for you to have a conversation with somebody if it is something that might be a little bit more delicate, that actually should have some more eyeball to eyeball situation, because in some cases we can really cause some problems with this. All right. So writing for mobile. Assuming everything I've talked about is all set, assuming everything that I just shared, you've got a great subject line, you're very clear in your purpose. Part of the other different things for you to think about, along those lines are, can this be read on one mobile screen? So if it pops up on someone's phone, can they see the gist of what you're talking about on just one screen? Or do they have to do one thumb up, two thumbs up, three thumbs up? Another thing to think about is, does it pass the reading glasses test? In some cases, we write so densely and so, complicated that you want to say, can someone take a glance at this, look at, several of the words, and have a gist of what is going to be discussed in this session. I'll say this once and I'll say it many times. Are there too many topics? In many cases, we are trying to discuss too many topics, and that can actually complicate our situation in many cases. So in many situations, you really do want to think about, is this really ready for a phone? Are we really focused to be presenting on email in our best way, in an effective way? All right, so now let's continue. I'm going to talk about a global audience. When I did these workshops at several tech companies that were multinational, we came to realize that most of the people were going to be writing emails in a language that was not their native tongue. And this can really make things very complicated, and there's lots of potential for issues with this. So you want to think about, what are the words? What are the phrases? What are things that sound fine in one language but don't necessarily work in another language? And you want to make your language and your phrases and your words, I don't want to make it sound like you don't want to talk intelligently, but in some cases you don't want to talk in a super complicated way. Obviously, if it's something technical, that's a different situation. But, and you don't want to have things be vague. You want to have things be very clear as far as expectations. So one of the things you might want to talk to is have several people take a look at your email before you hit send, because in some cases what makes sense from your perspective may not make sense in other situations. Also, something that came up in this workshop that I did that was really quite intriguing was we realized that in many cases, there was obviously holidays that are different from around the world. And one thing we found was that people had different feelings when emails came up at the time on a holiday or early in the morning or at night. So one thing you may want to find out if you are emailing in an international setting is, are there sort of etiquette guidelines that work in certain countries that don't necessarily work in your country or vice versa? Because these are different ways for us to be thinking about what makes sense for us and how we are perceived. So let me go over here to the poll. Oh, shoot. Is there something wrong with my screen? Sorry, I need to go back over here to the dashboard. Okay, my apologies. All right, so let me launch the next poll. So answer those questions if you would. When you get up in the morning, when do you check email? When do you check email? Right now, about 30% of you have voted. All right, let's give this another minute. We're at 75% who have voted. All right, we're at 80%, so I think we'll go ahead and call that a good. So let me close the poll and I'll show you the results. All right, so over 50% check your phone first thing in the morning and look at email. Before breakfast, before working out, before anything else, you wake up and reach for your phone. So when you're writing email, think for a minute. When this person wakes up or reaches for their phone and reads this message, is that going to be a good thing? Is it going to make them want to take action? Do they know what I'm expecting? Or is it just sort of a vague sort of a thing? So one thing I really encourage people to do, and we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, is before you hit send, visualize you're on the other side of that email and it's coming over to you. Kudos to the 25% of you who do not check your email until you get to the office. I think that is just great. I also want to be sure to let people know I'm going to have some time at the end for questions and answers. So please put your questions in there. If Kirthi's voice can't do it, I will read the questions before the end of the session and before I ask them, so people can get a good sense of what's going on and what the questions are. So let's go ahead and continue. Let me close out that poll in just a minute here. All right, and thank you to the 81% of you who voted. All right. So think about clarity, 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 and the timing, and just really what are some best ways for you to be sure you're writing this out. I am a big fan of what's called mind mapping, and this is kind of a little bit of a clunky tool here, if you will. But this little tool here, this little clunky thing here. But I'm going to encourage you to take a look at this and think about this little tool here. So write a circle on a piece of paper. And then think about, what is the first thing I want someone to think about? The intro. I do think it's important to be polite. Say hello. You know, if you get on the phone, you typically say, hi, how are you? When you see someone in person, you typically say, hi, how are you? Email should be the same. Then think about, what is the reason we're getting together today on the webinar? Or what is the reason we're going to meet in person? And then what's the action step that's going to be requested after that? And then let's determine where we're going to go from here. And so if you think about this as a circle that goes around, and I'm not doing this drawing very well, but if you think about that, how it goes around, what are some different ways for you to message in a clear and thoughtful format for you so that you can possibly say to somebody, here's what I want, and here's the reason I'm writing. Here's what I'd like to ask you to do, and next steps. I will share with you the next steps. I do ask people to do something in many of my emails, but I also let them know in the next steps that I will check back with them in a few days to see if they have any questions. This gives me permission to stay in touch with them, to stay on top of the communication, not just to leave it to chance. And when people realize I'm going to follow up with them, I'm going to stay in touch, I'm going to be keeping tabs on this, if you will, because it's important to me that we move this to the point that the issue or whatever it is that we're talking about is done and closed, then something you want to think about is how you can possibly be sure that this is all set and it stays in your camp. The communication stays in your camp. The final thing that people should see is your contact information. And so I have it be very, very clear. I also have it be in the email where it says from, in the left of your email box. It says from Diane Darling, and then there's a bar, a vertical bar, and then there is my phone number. So every email that people get from me in the from, it shows my phone number. So it makes it super easy for people to be in touch. So one question I'm going to ask now is what platform you're using. What platform are you using? Do you use Gmail? Do you use Outlook? Do you use something else? So if you could share what you use, I'll share with you a few tips on some of the tools that may be useful for people. We've got about 60% who voted. Thank you again for your votes. Go out and vote. It's always an important thing to vote whenever you possibly can. All righty. We're about 80%. I'll give this just another second to see if we can get a few more people to share their vote. Okay. All right. I'll close the poll. I'll share the results. And so it's actually, Outlook seems to be the more dominant one over Gmail, but those are the two strongest ones for sure. And so Outlook, one of the things that's terrific about Outlook, it's very high in security. So that's one of the reasons why many corporations do prefer that. With Gmail, there are lots of back-end tools. I'll share with you a few of them in a minute. Excuse me. But you want to think about, are there ways to create some settings? For both Gmail and Outlook, you can set up the tool that I just mentioned. Now, before you hit send, I cannot emphasize this enough. Is there any possibility that this email could be, this message could be misunderstood? Is there any possibility that the person is going to misinterpret what you're saying? Because email does have, quote, tone. How we say something written is very different from how we say something in person or even on the phone. So for example, I could say to somebody, you know, you're driving me crazy. Well, is that a good crazy or is that a bad crazy? You know, or can you please give me a moment? Can you please give me a moment when I'm saying that, when someone's got, you know, Diane, I got 3 questions for you, or can I bother you? Or I'm at my office and someone says, oh, you know, can you show me how to do this? You know, I say, can you give me a moment? That's different than if I write, can you give me a moment? Because that can sound kind of rude and snarky and unkind. So one thing you really want to think about is there any possibility that a message you send could be misinterpreted? Because if that's the case, then you may want to say, maybe what I should do is send an email and say, I'd really like to talk to you about this project. I want to be sure I understand some of the details or expectations. Can we set up a phone call, or can we set up a Skype, or can we set up some sort of a way for us to have a conversation where we can see each other or have at least the audio? One of the great things about seeing each other is I find that people don't tend to try and multitask when I'm doing a Skype, or I use a tool called Appear, APP, I use Appear, or Google Hangouts is another one. Zoho has a tool, I believe, for this as well. I'm not as familiar with that one, I'm embarrassed to say. But, is there a way for you to be able to have some conversation with people when you're looking at each other, even if it's remotely? Because then you're not going to be eating. You're not going to be trying to do your email at the same time. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I didn't realize that I was still screen sharing. And the woman writes me, and she goes, "Diane, I can see you're cleaning out your email. Can you stop sharing your screen?" I was embarrassed, obviously. So part of what you want to think about is there a way for you to say, is this the best thing? An email, maybe, maybe not. Read it out loud. This is pretty shocking. I have found sometimes when I read emails out loud, they don't make as much sense as I thought they did. And so no wonder the person on the other side isn't answering me, because what I asked or what I said didn't really make a lot of sense. So if you read it out loud, this is something that I have found to be very, very useful. And then, as I mentioned earlier, have I imagined myself, I don't know, maybe asleep, or maybe, coming back from a meeting, or, taking a break from a walk or something like that. I pull my phone out of the pocket and I look at my messages and I see your message. And does that really say, wow, that is a message that I do want to answer? Because I showed this last week, again, my apologies, we want to feel that when someone sends us a message, we matter. We just really want to feel like we matter. We don't want to feel like there's something that's so cruel or something that is so horrible. There was an email several years ago that got made public, and it was somebody at a law firm, and he was chastising people in his department or at the law firm for not answering their emails quickly enough. We gave you, at the time, it was Blackberries for you to respond quickly, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it turned out this man was head of the divorce department, and several people were guessing, yeah, this man's probably divorced. So emails will, and this is something I will also encourage you, is emails will go public. Emails will go public. So be really careful. When you write it, it is documented. And is there any possibility this could get you into trouble, your company into trouble? Will it make your family be proud if they see it? Is there some foul language that maybe, doesn't necessarily translate? Those are some things I think that are kind of important to think about. All right, let me talk about some of the apps or tools that I like to use that help me. Actually, let me go back. I'm going to do a couple more polls. All right, we're going to launch this poll. Have you ever sent an email that got you in trouble? Personally, professionally, either one. Okay, we got about 60%. Wait for a few minutes for a few more people to vote. It's so funny as these things change over a minute of time. You see it go one way, and then all of a sudden it goes the other way. We have about 70%. Anybody else want to toss in your last minute vote? All righty. All right, I'll close the poll. I'll share the results. I'm actually quite impressed. The majority of you said no. I maybe and maybe this is why I like teaching it, because I've made several mistakes myself. I've regretted hitting send more than once. And so part of my reason why I actually do like teaching this is I know that feeling when you've actually hurt somebody or you've done some damage. And, it's about 50-50, but it's not quite. But, I would just really, think about what, if you've ever done this, you know how awful that feels when you've done something that has gotten you in trouble and it's not a good thing. All right, apps and tools. I am an app junkie. I will actually, before I continue here, I have to say I love Zoho. I've been a client for, I think, gosh, since 2004, so a long, long time. I love how Zoho now makes it easy from your phone to be doing email. There are some great tools that they have definitely implemented into their system. So they've really kept up with the technology. It gets better all the time. So it's a terrific one here. So I just want to say from the get-go that I definitely want to be sure that everybody realizes that, Zoho is an app you can use. I use a couple of other ones in the process. Assistant 2 right here is one. If the Outlook add-on isn't available, I believe it's coming up soon. The reason I like this one so much is it interfaces with my calendar. Let me see if I can actually just do a quick live demo here. Let me do this. So you see this right here. And shoot. And over here in the corner, let me move this over, is this little A thing. So this launches my calendar. Oh, okay. Kirthi, I'm going to do a fake one to you. All right. So I want to set up a conversation with Kirthi. I want to make myself as easy for her to work with as per whenever she sees an email from Diane. Oh, I look forward to working with Diane. Diane's easy to work with, et cetera, et cetera. So what I can do is I want to schedule a call with her, and we're going to maybe have it be a 30-minute call. I pick several times that work for me. And let's say I'll give it a week or so, and I'll pick another few times. And so when she gets the email from me, she sees here, I want to set the time, and she picks the times that are best for her. This makes it most likely for her to get back to me faster versus, oh, is 2 o'clock on Tuesday working for you? No, how about 4 o'clock on Wednesday? Does that work for you? And you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So, and it also, she can then view it in her time zone right here. So she doesn't have to do any calculating or anything like that. She can just go ahead and figure that out right away. This is absolutely one of my most favorite tools, And so one thing I'm going to encourage you to think about is, do you make it super easy for people to work with you and answer your emails? Calendly is another one I like. It doesn't give you the possible. So what you do is you send a link to somebody, and so my Calendly link is my name, calendly.com in my name. And then I send that link to people, and I send that out to people who, may or may not want to be in touch with me. I'm less interested in being sure that we can have a conversation than I am. If it happens, fine. If not, fine. So that's how I use Calendly. Book Like a Boss is a tool I use now more and more for my coaching, because it gives me the option of sending people a text message to remind them that we have a scheduled call. So when you're sending email, in most cases, you're sending this for action. You're not sending this just to inform people or chat. That's a newsletter. But if you're looking to actually have somebody who's going to respond to you and schedule something, that's what I use some of the scheduling tools for. LinkedIn. Before you send an email to anybody, even if it's somebody you think you know, go to LinkedIn and see if there's something about them that maybe you didn't realize. I'm always amazed at what I find when I go to LinkedIn. I'm like, you know this, or you know this person, or, are there things that, you thought about? Who knew? Who knew? So in many cases, I really encourage people to think about what are some different ways for you to be more engaged with the person. I think in some cases, we get a little bit overexcited about the millions of people out there for us to do business with. Instead, focus on 5, 10, and then go to the next 5 or 10. We can get a little bit overwhelmed. I use Evernote as a place to store many emails and get them out of my inbox. If I get a receipt from a purchase I make, it goes over to Evernote. I use this a lot to store things that I don't necessarily need to have in my inbox, and I can get them out and get them cleaned up and make that better. All right, in a few minutes, I'm going to start with some questions, so start thinking about that, and we will get moving on that in just a minute. So one of the last things I'm going to ask you to think about is, what's your action plan? What are you going to do next? So I'm going to encourage you to look at 3 emails that you need to answer. Look at 3 emails that you need to answer and apply some of these principles. Maybe mind map it. Maybe read it out loud. If you're writing in a language that isn't your native tongue, see if there's a way for you to have somebody take a look at it and be sure that it is something that actually makes sense. And is that the best thing to do? So before we go into the questions, I'd like to end up with one last poll here. I can move over. Sugar. Okay. So share with me, and I'm just curious if you found this useful. Yes, this is kind of like my egotistical moment, or, hopefully it was useful. Do you feel more confident in writing emails than you did before? Do you feel like this was worth your time? So we've got 30% of the people who voted. We're at 50 now. All right. A few more people want to vote before we go to the questions, and then we'll wrap up. All right. Well, I am grateful to see that 74% of you felt like you were more confident. For those of you who didn't think you learned anything, maybe please share with Kirthi and Soho what you wished you had learned or what your expectations were that you did not feel you got. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.